whose autograph? Oh, what do you know? Jimbo's real name is Corky. And Krusty! Hey, Cayman Islands Offshore Holding Corporation. Krusty was supposed to sign this. Take it back and make him sign it.
No. Stamping the back of a check is perfectly legal, little boy. Many people do it to save time. You see, in this case, instead of writing out his name, Krusty has stamped the name of his Cayman Islands Holding Corporation on the... excuse me a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't divulge information about that customer's secret illegal account. Oh, crap. I shouldn't have said it was a customer. Oh, crap. I shouldn't have said it was a secret. Oh, crap. I certainly shouldn't have said it was illegal. Ah, it's too hot today.
Hey! I bought this popcorn fair and square.
Sorry, the bank is... Oh, kid, gosh, I meant to tell you. Turns out that Krusty is one of the biggest tax cheats in history, and they nailed him, all thanks to you. Some might say you're a hero, kid. Not me, however. I love Krusty.
And that, folks, was our brilliant intro to this week's Week in Review. That was the main topic of the Week in Review is going to be about the Pandora Papers, not the Paradise Papers, not the Panama Papers, but the Pandora Papers. And as we see, a famous celebrity of Springfield, Krusty the Clown, is actually implicated in offshore, tax scams, trying to hide his assets, etc. And we're going to talk a whole lot about that today. So welcome to the Green and Red's Week in Review. And we'll have
once again, let me point out that's a Green and Red exclusive. That's not in the Pandora Papers. We got that. So once again, Green and Red is ahead of the news, as are the Simpsons. So, it's kind of cool because that's a really old episode, and it shows that this current furor we have over the Pandora Papers isn't new. It's kind of revived, it's revitalized and reared its ugly head, but it's something that's been going on for a long time. And so we're gonna have some fun. Well, I don't know if it's fun to talk about this. We're gonna talk about it anyway. So the Pandora Papers, because it opened up a Pandora box, was essentially an investigation by a consortium, the ICIJ, and I forget what that stands for.
The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists,
which
who also brought us the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers.
And it included 14 different news outlets, including the Washington Post. And it found that there are 956 companies and 336 high-level politicians and government officials who are essentially hiding $11.3 trillion in assets so that they don't have to be held accountable for them or pay taxes or anything like that. So it's rich people, of course, right? And it includes all the movers and shakers of global finance. Ironically, the best take I've seen on this, and I can only read half the article because it's paywall, came from the Wall Street Journal, which essentially said there's nothing new, nothing to see here. And that's actually kind of true, as we've seen from The Simpsons in the early 21st century. But it's still worth talking about because I think it's a good indication of how capitalism works. I think a lot of this is being portrayed as kind of an aberration or an excess of capitalism. The reality is it's just capitalism. It's the way it works. And offshore investments and offshore banking is not illegal. Not reporting it, using it as a tax shelter is sometimes illegal, depending on who you are. But the media is kind of going crazy on this. A lot of lefties are. There's a lefty conspiracy theory on it going about, which I think we want to talk about. And anyway, how much of that 11.3 trillion is yours, Scott?
Probably zero.
Yeah.
Probably zero. I don't think I'm in that.
I guess we shouldn't tell people. We shouldn't tell people that we shouldn't tell people about the Green and Red account in the Caymans, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
we're laundering all our Patreon money.
Yeah. And a big shout out to all of our patrons out there.
That's right. We're up to 21 now, I think.
We're up to 21. Solidarity
which means
with
that
all those people.
We're getting close to 1,000 now. We're going to be at 1,000 soon. So anyway.
Yeah.
But what was your first reaction when you heard this story, like last week or whenever?
I mean, it's meh. You know, it's nothing. There's nothing new in it. I mean, it's always the salacious details that former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and his wife, you know, were implicated, or the Chilean president, Sebastian Pinera, who has been, you know, cracking down on anti-neoliberal protesters in his country while he's like hoarding all this money in offshore accounts. By the way, he is like the only official statement to come out of the Chilean government is that Pinera denies that he has anything to do with this. And then the other thing of note is that there's actually a number of politicians in these different countries who've actually campaigned on anti-corruption platforms who are actually really involved. The president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, actually got elected and campaigned in 2018 on an anti-corruption platform, but then it turns out that something like 6 members of his family have actually been linked to 13 of the offshore companies named in the Pandora Papers. And then there's this piece. I think this will be a little bit what we talk about when we talk about the lefty conspiracy, but there's also where, you know, the other salacious detail is that Vladimir Putin's mistress / baby mama has a house in Monaco, which has been paid for and kind of covered up in these offshore accounts. And, you know, I'm always a little scared to say Putin on YouTube because you never know really what's going to happen to you if that happens. But, you know, I hope to lay low. Shakira and Julio Iglesias.
And so Shakira's hips might not lie, but her accountant does.
Yeah. Oh, well played.
Boom, bada bing. But it's you know, like, I mean, $11.3 trillion obviously is an immense amount of money, which could go a long way if it were taxed to, you know, doing like productive things. I mean, you know, that's more than the 7.5 trillion that's, or I'm sorry, the 3.5 trillion that Joe Manchin and Karen Kristen Sinema are kind of drawing a line in the sand over. So it's a lot of money. And, you know, not to make light of it, but this is the way global finance operates. I mean, the idea of offshore tax shelters in the Caymans has been a staple of pop culture long before the Simpsons. I mean, I remember that was always a joke, you know, offshore islands in the Caymans, that kind of thing forever. I can always remember that happening. And, you know, what's striking about it, obviously, is the immensity of it. I guess when something like this happens, so I wonder how many people are actually shocked by it, you know? And the other part of this, and I forgot to look it up, is like we read about it in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and, you know, The Guardian. But is this filtering down? Like, is Fox News covering this? Is AO1, AON, whatever, OAN or Newsmax? I mean, like, how many people are actually aware of this? And how many people care? It's kind of, remember when Trump said, well, of course I cheat on my taxes. That's what everybody does. And generally people say, yeah, I guess. You know, I mean, I was never really all that geeked up about going after Trump's taxes. I thought there was like a lot worse stuff you could do than that he had done. But I mean, is this really going to matter in the big run?
I mean, I think if anything, it just contributes to people's cynicism about the system and about politics, and that like any figure, you know, is going to be somehow wrapped up with the system and the elite and the ruling class, etc. And so it's people just like disengaged. They turn up, you know, in the old days we said they would just turn up their TV and just kind of keep tuning out. And I think, you know, this isn't going to really change much, and the people who want to fight it are going to keep fighting it, and the people who don't care are going to probably not care. Maybe it'll break through and create a revolution, but
it's always great. Yeah, it's always great to have this information, but there's something like last night I was kind of reading about this, and in addition to these Pandora Papers, there's also a report called, I think, was it FinCEN, Financial Center, the FinCEN files, which are part of the ICIJ project, which are worth looking at too. But I was just kind of looking around, and I found an article from 2012, so 9 years ago in Forbes, and it was about a report that was done by somebody from McKinsey, the biggest consulting firm in the world. Now, in 2012, it said that this report said that extremely wealthy people have accumulated at least 21 trillion in secretive offshore accounts, which at the time was a sum equal to the GDPs of the US and Japan combined, right? Two of the biggest economies in the world, right? So that was in 2012 that they discovered that $21 trillion was being kind of stashed away in these offshore accounts and not being taxed. So we've known this for a while. It's obviously great to have this new information. And it's kind of been a bombshell and it's been all over the media, but I don't know how far it's gone beyond that. But, and we could talk about that, but the reality is, I mean, I don't think, do you have anything that we can say that hasn't been said before, anything new?
No, other than, I do want to just kind of comment on this whole thing. It's a bombshell. It's all this new stuff. You know, this has actually been going on for a long time. When I was much younger in the early 90s, I remember there was a scandal around a British bank called BCCI. It's like the Bank of Credit and Commerce.
Commerce International. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, it was, you know, people like John Kerry or Linda Carter's husband, you know, were like implicated in it. And I just want to say that, like, this is how capitalism works, right? Rich people are always going to hire the smartest people they can think of to protect their money. And at the current manifestation is it's in offshore accounts in the Caymans or in Panama or whatever. Switzerland. And they're just going to continue to do that as long as, you know, we turn the TV up and ignore it. And so the big thing is to keep pushing. But like this goes way back, right? You know, back to the Spanish stealing all the gold from the Aztecs. I'm sure they put that in their version of offshore accounts. And so just this is just a natural process of the system, and that's why we have to resist the system.
Yeah. The task is to be outraged and act upon this. And I think that's where, you know, because we have known about it for a long time. So, you know, I'm not criticizing. This is great. I'm glad they did it. And the fact that mainstream journalists are kind of reporting on it certainly is great. They're writing editorials about it. But, you know, we have to act upon it because generally these things are met kind of in a very nonchalant way, like, yeah, this is what capitalists do. And, you know, if there's kind of two ways of looking at it, right? You can say, well, this is what capitalists do and shrug your shoulders and say, you know, what are you going to do? Throw your hands in the air. Or you can say, this is how capitalism works. This is the innate nature of capitalism. We need to do a lot more than we've been doing, right? And that's what we're trying to get to. You know, we need to do a lot more than we've been doing. And that means more than voting for, you know, somebody with a D in, you know, parenthesis next to his or her name on election day. So, you know, maybe this can be a catalyst and people can use it. I know as an activist now, because a lot of stuff you do targets financial institutions, it targets banks, it targets insurance companies that fund, you know, these really horrific fossil fuel projects and these projects that destroy the environment. I mean, is this something you can use now as part of your arsenal against them to get people kind of rallied?
I do think that I've campaigned against banks professionally, honestly, for 15 years. And so it's real easy to get people to go out and take action against banks, be unhappy about banks. We've done a real effective job out there of tying the banks to the fossil fuel projects, which has been the sort of world in which I've worked. And so more people got involved in campaigning against banks when something like Occupy Wall Street happened than when the sort of like dark things that create cynicism happen, like financial crash. We didn't actually really see people get involved in the beginning. They got involved later. You know, when these revelations happen, we don't see a huge number of people get in the streets, but when, you know, there's people organizing against fossil fuel projects like pipelines and coal plants, and people who can't go are told that they can go to the local bank, then you start seeing a lot of action. And so, I mean, I think that the kind of important piece here is, and I think this has been an ongoing theme of the Green and Red podcast, is the ruling class takes notice when there's, you know, people raising hell in the streets. And sometimes that's civil raising hell, and sometimes that's uncivil, like what we saw a lot in 2020. And so real important component here is the more people in the streets, the more people, you know, protesting banks, burning down banks, whatever, is like what is gonna be more effective, not just like getting like news that we're still getting ripped off by the ruling class. You know, big revelation.
You know, if you haven't watched our show on radical movies, Scott and I talk about our favorite radical films, you should, because one of the themes we brought up very early on, right, was that there are a lot of movies that celebrate bank robbers. That, you know, Americans don't like bankers. You know, Woody Guthrie, Jolly Banker, and, you know, Jesus Christ, it was the cops and the bankers that nailed him to the cross. So, you know, who do we shoot in Grapes of Wrath? Bonnie and Clyde were national heroes. Pretty Boy Floyd was a national hero. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid were heroes, right? Because they hated bankers. Like, nobody I know likes bankers. Bankers control your life, right? A banker can deny you a home loan, forcing you to go rent and pay twice what you would on a house note, right? So we should realize that. I don't think people on the left realize that's a good target, because you're going to be hard pressed to find anybody who's had a really good experience with bankers, right? So I think there is room in there.
Except for other bankers.
Yeah, but I mean, we've talked before about spaces, right? When the ruling class has these fractures, there are spaces, and I think this is kind of, to some extent, this is a space, right, where you can go after bankers, right? And, you know, I mean, everybody takes advantage of this, absolutely, right? Now, I also want to talk, because there's recently been, I hate to call it a conspiracy theory, but there are people on the left who automatically look for more than is there. I mean, I'm pretty much a believer in most cases in Occam's razor. You know, the most likely, obvious explanation is the likely one. And so to me, this is about, you know, rich people hiding their money. But a lot of, you know, I've seen these kind of left versions now, which are suggesting that the International Consortium of Investigating Journalists has received funding from various sources, right? Including sources that may have some dark, shadowy, indirect links to the CIA and to other, you know, American intelligence operations. And this is a big disinfo campaign. And they're basically suggesting this because, you know, who comes in for particular, you know, criticism, you know, Putin, a minister in Chile, Kenyatta, and the people named aren't like American officials. And surely, you know, there must be American officials who are doing this. But if you go onto their website, the Pandora Papers website, and you look a little further, and you look also in the FinCEN files, and what you're going to find is that it's really explicit. Like 3 of the 5 biggest banks involved in these schemes are JP Morgan Chase, the American bank, HSBC, the Bank of New York Mellon, and Deutsche Bank, and others. In the 2012 report, Goldman Sachs was explicitly mentioned. They are defying. There are all kinds of bans on money laundering, and these New York banks are moving huge amounts of illicit cash. And there's actually even a video in I think the FinCEN files, a little 2-minute video, which shows how it works. And it's about New York banks. Essentially, New York banks act as intermediaries so somebody can establish a shell company wherever, and you establish a company, pretend you're making whatever, right? You're making plastic cups or something like that. And then you get funds from another bank. And then eventually you use that to get bigger funds from you go to regional banks, and then you try to get bigger funds, bigger loans from these big banks. In 2019, American banks, just American banks, filed 2 million plus suspicious activity reports. That means that you're getting a request for a loan that may not be on the up and up. You know, they're flagging it basically, right? They then cleared $2 trillion plus in transactions that were flagged as suspicious, and they took fees on all of them, right? Baker McKenzie, which is the largest law firm in the United States, actually was a pioneer in developing this entire offshore banking structure, and it still operates within it. So the Pandora Papers explicitly talked about the role of places like South Dakota, for instance. You know, I think it's ironic that the president's from Delaware. You know, when I first started kind of learning politics, Delaware was the credit card state. Delaware was the incorporation state because it was really easy to incorporate there and had very few fees. And a lot of the credit card companies set up in Delaware because they didn't have any usury laws. And then later they moved to South Dakota. I wanted to say San Diego, San Dakota, South Dakota. Isn't that where the lieutenant governor is trying to pull a coup, or the attorney general or something? Is that South Dakota? Or is that North Dakota right now? The governor's out of state, and the lieutenant governor is basically trying to essentially have a coup against him. So
it might be South Dakota.
But in the 70s and 80s, South Dakota changed its laws on usury. So if you notice, like I remember back when I used to get credit card bills, like real ones, you would send a payment into South Dakota because there were essentially no fees there, right? And this is all spelled out in the Pandora Papers too. So, I mean, for all of you who are suggesting this is a deep black op, or, you know, it's a disinformation campaign, maybe, but, you know, plenty of US institutions are deeply implicated in this. So, I mean, they may not mention Joe Biden by name, you know, whereas they do Putin, but the reality is that this is, and that's the thing I think that's important, what we were talking about. This isn't really like some kind of nefarious conspiracy, you know, with a bunch of guys smoking cigars in some room in a cave, you know. This is just American finance law, right? You know, I would assume you learn this shit in accounting school, you know. So I'm not sure I really don't think the US is being let off the hook. I mean, if you read this, it's pretty damning. So I'm not sure, you know, kind of, and the other part of this is like, why go looking for this idea that somebody else, that the CIA is behind this, rather than take what's given and use that? I mean, this is pretty fucking damning stuff. You know, like they're stealing $11 trillion and they're not paying taxes, whereas you are, right? Instead, you distract away from that, which is really, I think, the main issue, to say, well, but they didn't include the names of Americans who are doing it, right? I mean, maybe they didn't, you know. I mean, I'm not going to ever say the CIA is not involved in something, because it's involved in a lot of stuff, right? Also, not terribly competent in a lot of stuff, but that's another story. So anyway, it's a big story. It's a bombshell. Like when we first started talking about this, I was kind of geeked, but the more I think about it, it's a less bombshellish, I guess. Although I guess if Shakira's in it, it's going to be a bombshell, right?
Leo Iglesias.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that's the thing, that just my own personal little rant on left conspiracy theories is that, I mean, that's the thing that left conspiracies do, is they actually give too much credit and too much power to those who don't deserve it. Like the CIA, granted, I don't disagree, the CIA has done a lot of fucked up things in the history of the CIA, but you know, they've also proven to be pretty incompetent at what they have done. And there's a much, and not only that, but the CIA is actually outdoing the bidding of wealthy bankers on Wall Street and politicians in South Dakota who are, you know, basically a tax haven for the super wealthy. And you know, to me, I'm very much about getting to the root causes of things. And I think, if anything, that's the important thing about the Pandora Papers, is it actually gets to the root cause of why, you know, Americans are, you know, why there's an increasing wealth gap, why we're in a new Gilded Age, why there's a lot of politicians who are paid and supported by these wealthy donors who do everything they can to fight Medicare for all, or fight the Green New Deal, or what have you. And I think that's a really important thing. I'm going to do a little clip here in a little bit with Joe Manchin, where he's talking about the entitlement mentality and the reward mentality. And that's, I think it's just like a important thing to flag, is that, like, you know, Joe Manchin is doing what he's doing because he's backed by the Kochs, who are people who probably, you know, implicated in some of these tax havens. So just to kind of put that out there.
Well, yeah, and you know, the other part about that with regard to Americans is between starting with the Trump tax cuts, and before that, the Bush and Obama tax cuts, and then last year the Fed just created, I don't know, $8 to $10 trillion. That money was then taken and either used in stock buybacks or investing in remember the stock market at one point had gone down to like 23,000, now it's at 35,000, right? Because all of these banks had access to this money that the Fed simply invented, right? They gave typical Americans a $1,200 check, right? Or $1,400 check, or whatever it was. But then they created $12 trillion, whatever it was, $12 trillion. And they were doing this before quantitative easing. They did this in 2008, where they created trillions of dollars for banks, but not for homeowners who had lost their homes, right? So who needs offshore sanctuaries when the Fed is giving you money that you can just invest in the stock market, right? And create, I mean, you've seen everybody out there, I'm sure, has seen those memes or those charts which show the value of the 4 or 5 wealthiest people: Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, before and after the pandemic, right? And how just immensely they've gone up. That's not because of offshore tax sanctuaries. That's because the government gave them a lot of money and they essentially created this kind of pandemic economy. And that's all legal. And like I said, you know, offshore banking isn't illegal. hiding your money is. So, and I mean, this isn't done in secret. Offshore banking is that's part of banking. A good accountant will show you how to do that, right? Now, he's not going to tell you if to cover his own ass, make sure you don't report this or let's hide it so it's, secretive. But the reality is, a lot of American, last year during COVID, remember they would have those briefings. And as soon as those briefings were over, people like Purdue and Leffler and Feinstein went out and sold stock and made huge profits of it, right? And Martha Stewart did time for way less than that. And you have US senators who are using inside information they're getting at briefings. And they're going immediately walking outside and calling their brokers up and pocketing huge amounts of money. So offshore sanctuaries are part of capitalism, just like insider trading is, just like the Fed subsidizing you is. So that there is an entitlement society.
Tax loopholes. Why Jeff Bezos pays less taxes than you are?
Yeah. Yeah, there's absolutely an entitlement society, no doubt about it. And it applies to the 1% of the ruling class, So, Black Lung Joe Manchin, I finally figured out how to say it. Black Lung Joe Manchin there. A coal baron, he's a coal baron. I mean, Blankenship must be jealous. Blankenship actually did, a year in, minimum security prison or something like that. Joe Manchin's in the US Senate. Manchin too, I've said it last week, how can you talk to this guy and not want to put a pie in his face? It's so unctuous. It's so disingenuous. I mean, Sinema is just a dumbass, and an idiot. But I mean,
can we actually hear Joe in his own words real quick?
Yeah.
And I just want to say, because Sinema and Manchin have really been in the crosshairs with the media and with the left and the liberals. And, Sinema spends a lot of time hiding from her constituents, ignoring her constituents when they confront her on planes. We had thought about playing that video today, but it's painful to watch because she's just such an asshole to the person trying to confront her. But, and she won't talk to the media about why she's doing what she's doing. Manchin, however, owns it. And so I just want to give you a clip of that.
To who we are as a society, who we are as a nation, and why we are still the hope of the world. I don't believe that we should turn our society into an entitlement society. I think that we should still be a compassionate, rewarding society. I think that fares best for all of us. But compassion means taking care of those who can't take care of themselves, whether they're young, whether they've had some type of a challenge in life, whether it be mental or physical. Those are responsibilities that we have, and we can all meet those responsibilities. And I feel very strongly about that. And we will continue. This is going to take time to get this done. Getting it done quickly is not going to benefit anyone.
Just want to say that, when Joe's talking about the reward society, he's talking about, things like his family who has been rewarded for sitting on the Energy and Finance Committee. Actually, I think he's the head of the Energy and Finance Committee right now. And, he gets a nice, healthy check from from the coal sector. On a regular basis, or
his daughter. His daughter is the CEO of a company that makes EpiPens, and he's gets a lot of donations, as does Sinema from pharmaceutical companies. So, that's the reward society. He's worked hard to get to that point, right? Joe Manchin's suit.
Selling your soul is pretty hard work. I just want to put that out there.
I know a little bit about clothing. Joe Manchin's suit costs more than the typical American family makes in a month. Okay, so no, it's and the thing is that so much of the support for that comes from really people who are living in precarity. It's this Stockholm syndrome kind of thing where you get people to defend you and to continue to be loyal to you, even though you've treated them in the most horrific way possible, right? This guy comes from West Virginia. That's as poor as it gets. Appalachia is the poorest part of America. So he's essentially saying that these people, his constituents now, are freeloaders, right? Why doesn't he just call them the 47% of the takers or call them deplorables? Because that's what he's saying. His constituents, that's not part of the compassionate society. Those are his people. He could vote for a 3.5 trillion, which means 350 billion a year fund, and then go to these people and say, hey, I'm bringing you jobs, I'm bringing you schools, I'm cleaning your water up, I'm getting you jobs. But instead, he's saying,
healthcare.
Yeah, I'm giving you healthcare, right? Instead, he's saying, you need to work hard, you need to be rewarded. You know, you need to work in those mines and die by the time you're 40. So it's pretty fucked up. It's pretty fucked up, and I don't know. We say this every week, I guess. So, but that's Black Hung Joe Manchin in his nice fancy Seville Row suit. You know.
Yep.
But
and then we have the last our closing segment is one that we like, which is love them, they're liberals. And we're going to talk about
love me, I'm a liberal.
We're going to talk about the defiant opposition to the things like the Pandora Papers and to Joe Manchin's entitled or reward society.
We should get like Phil Oakes. We should put that in rather than have us sing it, because I remember as part of my political education, the first time I heard that song, I was just like blown away by it. It was freaking awesome, and ever since then, it's kind of one of the founding principles of the Green Red podcast was to like expose liberals, right? And so we started last week was the first time we did it, and actually we talked about Manchin and Sinema, even though they're not really liberals. This week's honoree in the love them they're liberals category, though I think is a good liberal, right? When you say he like qualifies as kind of a liberal icon, he's kind of the male version of RBG without the bobblehead dolls.
Yep, it's true, and the nice documentary.
Yeah. And so, unveiling it, this week's Love Them and Liberal is who?
Stephen Breyer, Supreme Court Justice since the mid-90s.
Stephen
Breyer. Stephen Breyer, sitting on the Supreme Court for 20-something years.
Well, so he's probably young. What is he, like 57 now?
Something like that.
Yeah. I think he's 87. Now, are we being ageist? Probably. But Stephen Breyer, in the aftermath of the RBG debacle, when people like Scott and I were being attacked years ago for saying she needs to resign, she's as narcissistic and egotistic as Trump, she was diagnosed in 2009 with pancreatic cancer. She had several episodes of cancer after that. In 2013, it was very clear that the Democrats were going to get thumped in the next election and lose the Senate. And Obama tried to have a talk with her at lunch about leaving the Supreme Court at that point, so he could appoint somebody to replace her. And he really, Obama was not exactly the firmest guy. And RBG was offended and said that she wanted the first woman president to appoint her successor because she was obviously sure that Hillary Clinton was going to be elected, right? Well, and we know how that turned out. So nobody in the Democratic Party had the spine to say, you're gone. My joke used to be that they should send her fishing with Al Neri. Now I always say they should, have Silvio Dante go, take her for a ride along the New Jersey Turnpike, right? But metaphorically, of course. But she didn't, and so she died last year, and they dashed through a replacement appointee, Amy Coney Barrett, right? After they refused to let Obama replace Scalia, right? Well, now Stephen Breyer is 83 years old, and Joe Biden, more likely than not, has about a year left with a Democratic majority. It's hard to see a Democratic majority in the Senate on January, 4th or 6th, when are the senators inaugurated? They're inaugurated before the 20th. So it's hard to imagine a Democratic majority is going to be inaugurated on January 6th, 2023. Yeah. So the clock is ticking. Breyer has recently come out and made speeches saying the court's not political. He said that Texas abortion decision was bad, but it wasn't political. And in fact, some folks, went out last week and had a little, kind of celebration for him when he gave a talk in Washington, D.C. about his new book, right? Shutdown D.C. was there. And yep. And so Stephen Breyer, and I don't think people know, do you know how Breyer made a name for himself? He was working for Teddy Kennedy. This is actually right up your alley. He was working for Teddy Kennedy. Stephen Breyer apparently is the guy who came up with the idea of carbon offset trading. So you could trade, like you trade pollution credits, basically.
He's a liberal, so that makes a lot of sense. He's a liberal, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. We won't pollute as much, so you can get our credits for pollution. You can pollute more, right?
Let's just commodify it for profit, right?
Yeah. So that was Breyer, the great liberal, right? And the other part that gets me, and this is part of that kind of, I think, fetishization of the court. There's this idea, like you see these memes going around about everything Ruth Bader Ginsburg did and how women can thank her for everything. by all accounts, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a really brilliant lawyer, but she didn't suddenly say, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Lawyers build on precedent. There are other people who are working before you, and you may coalesce it, you may put it together, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not the only female lawyer in America who was doing this at the time. So the idea that somebody like Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Breyer or anybody is irreplaceable is just wrong. There are some brilliant people on the court. Louis Brandeis. I think Sotomayor is fantastic. I mean, she's one of my favorite Supreme Court justices of all time. But there are people who can replace them. If Ruth Bader Ginsburg had retired in 2009, you could have replaced her with somebody equally intelligent and equally committed toward a lot. And RBG's record on a lot of stuff like crime and Native American wasn't all that great. She and Scalia were best friends, right? Criminal defendant rights, things like that. And in the same way, if Breyer resigns, you can find somebody as smart as he is to replace him. You know, it's ironic, right? When Kavanaugh got in trouble, everyone said, oh, Trump's going to dump him. Trump didn't, not because he couldn't replace him. Brett Kavanaugh's not that smart that, you know, the Federalist Society has a list with 1,000 Brett Kavanaughs on it. That was Trump's way of saying, fuck you, I'm going to do what I want and you're going to take it. I'm going to throw this at you and you're going to eat it, right? The Democratic Party, on the other hand, is afraid to break anybody's, you know, hurt anybody's feelings.
I just want to point out the last three justices who were appointed to the court, which was, you know, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Comey Barrett. Is the Republicans were actually very strategic and fairly effective. Like McConnell, even though Obama was still in the White House, is like, no, we're not going to seat your Supreme Court justice, and was like pretty strategic about it. And just, I mean, I don't think he's like a genius or anything. He was just like smart enough to know that, you know, there's this liberal consensus, which the Democrats try to, you know, have with the Republicans. And he's like, I don't have to do that. Or with, you know, with Kavanaugh, you know, they got Kennedy to retire early or young because they actually probably saw the writing on the wall with the 2018 election and with the 2020 election. And then with Comey Barrett, as soon as Ginsburg passed away, they like sped through that stuff. And the Democrats just rolled over, you know, Feinstein basically saying this was like, this is the best confirmation process I've ever been part of, and hugged Lindsey Graham, you know, things like that. And so, whereas the Democrats seem to just like flounder and roll over and not just be really good at making like a strategy. I mean, we've talked about how the leadership probably needs to, you know, think about retiring themselves. And I think that's like a big part of the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I actually don't think it's ageist. I mean, I think people get set in their ways, they become established, they become very, very comfortable in what they do. The whole Merrick Garland thing, though, I mean, now everyone says, what would you do? Well, first of all, I'm not in Washington, D.C. I'm not a senator. But there are ways, like there are just like if you study politics, if you study Lyndon Johnson, if you study FDR, if you study Dick Nixon, there are ways to get shit done. I mean, on a very simple level, and maybe this wouldn't have worked, Obama could have made a recess appointment and put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court, in which case then the Republican Party would have to remove a sitting justice. Would they have done it? Probably. But, you know, that's a different beast politically. Politically, at the time, I remember, you know, when Scalia died, the majority of Americans did not agree with McConnell. They believed that Obama should be allowed to make that appointment. And then when Ginsburg died, the majority of Americans believed that the GOP should not replace her based on what it had done earlier, right? So in neither of these cases did they have any kind of consensus or majority on it. And again, the Democrats, you know, we're going to go to wall over this. We're going to move on, raised a lot of money over it. You know, I kept getting, every day I was getting all these emails from groups I never heard of asking me to donate. And what did they do with it? And what are they going to do with it, right? They can't get rid of Breyer. Kennedy, there was never any rumor that he was going to retire. Kennedy's son was a banker at Deutsche Bank who may or may not have had some kind of dealing with the Trump Corporation. And all of a sudden, Tony Kennedy's retiring out of the blue. Seems healthy, nothing wrong with him. Boom, they got rid of him. You know, they sent him fishing without Neary, right? They sent him on a car ride with Silvio Dante when there was no indication that he was getting ready to quit. Whereas Breyer, and I mean, what surprises me is people are being so explicit about it. Not just people like Shut Down DC, who are, you know, it's an awesome group, but I mean, you're seeing like op-eds now in the Washington Post and New York Times saying, Breyer, you need to get out of there. And I mean, they need to do it soon, right? They need to do it like now because, you know, the court reopens in October. And I don't know what his end game is, but, you know, if you wait till next summer, even Mitch McConnell will find a way to string this out because nobody, I mean, Mitch McConnell's not an evil genius. He's evil, but he's not a genius. He just knows that he's up against a bunch of chumps, the Washington Generals. Like he's Darth Vader and their Elmo. And that's the way it's going to be. And I mean, I think people were hysterical last year with the kind of word not America's Nazi Germany and Trump is a Hitler and all this kind of stuff. But it's bad and it will get worse and it could reach a point, a very critical point, unless you do something now. And the point we've always made is, these interregnums are time for people to organize. Don't just shriek, the sky is falling, fascism, coups, Hitler, Nazis, fascism, it's do something about it. Don't just say, well, make sure you vote in 2024, So love them, they're liberals.
Yep, love them, they're liberals.
They've become older and wiser, and that's why they're turning you in. Anyway, this was not as much, this wasn't lighthearted like we try to be on the Weekend Review, because it's kind of hard to enjoy the world nowadays, isn't it? There's not a lot of joy and delight in it. The Yankees have been defeated, so for a lot of people, I guess that's good news. I've become a San Francisco Giants fan at this point, so there you go. But it's a bleak times. It's a hard rains are gonna fall.
Yeah.
So
the Giants. That's a ray of sunshine, though. I'll say that as a Bay Area person.
I mean, it's a professional sports team, but I kind of like the kind of Cinderella story aspect of it. Nobody expected them to do well. Bad team last year, so.
Yeah.
But
totally.
So,
folks, you've been listening to the Week in Review.
Green and Red. Yeah.
Green and
Tell them to subscribe and share and comment and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So the first thing we'll say is, check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hit that subscribe button on this YouTube video, and share. And then the other thing is that, our Patreon base has been growing. Our YouTube subscriptions and views have been growing as well. And so check us out. And, if you want to make a one-time donation, go to greenandredpodcast.org and hit the support button. And then if you want to become a patron and really appreciate the uptick in patrons we've been getting lately, go to patreon.com/greenredpodcast. And so we actually had a goal of 20 patrons by the end of September. We got it here just a couple days ago in early October. So now we're going to set a new goal, and it's going to be 25. So we need 4 more patrons out there to become patrons of the Green and Red podcast and become a comrade, or become a part of the Green and Red crew. Or if you really have extra bucks, you can join the M19 Brigade. And we have just a couple of our close comrades here in the M19 Brigade, but we really want to encourage people to just give whatever they can, even if it's $1. We love everything we get. And then the other thing is that, we have been putting this out. This is like week 6, I believe. And so we're actually really enjoying the Weekend Review. And sometimes we're lighthearted and sometimes we're a little dark and cynical, but really want to encourage people to continue watching this, share it with your friends, say, God, that Bob and Scott, they're so funny and they're so brilliant. They're so great. And they're so good looking, right? Good looking. And so just check us out.
I think you're pushing it now. Right?
I think, no, there are many who would disagree. And so just check us out. This is the Green and Red podcast, Week in Review, and we love you. And so go out and make a lot of trouble, and we'll be out there with you.
In every American community, you have varying shades of political opinion. One of the shadiest of these is the liberals. An outspoken group on many subjects. 10 degrees to the left of center in good times, 10 degrees to the right of center if it affects them personally. So here then is a lesson in safe logic. I cried when they shot Medgar Evers. Tears ran down my spine. And I cried when they shot Mr. Kennedy, as though I'd lost a father of mine. But Malcolm X got what was coming. He got what he asked for this time. So love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. Get it? I go to civil rights rallies, and I put down the old DAR. DAR, that's the dikes of the American Revolution. I love Harry and